Okay. Anna's wondering about how this apply to her family's, what did it say? Her odd family structure. We'll get there. And then we'll talk about that. We'll end up with we'll kind of conclude with how does death play a part in this, because death is sort of inevitable, and those things that's going to happen in a family. So we'll discuss that as well. Like Pam mentioned, I have studied family systems for a long time. I was ordained 2 years ago, but previous to that, I was the director of college ministry for the diocese here in West Texas. And during those 10 years that I was doing that, 8 of those, I took a continuing ed class on family systems, and every year it was different, but it was mostly for clergy in parish ministry to understand their own family system, to better lead and function within their church system. And so that is where my knowledge and understanding of family systems comes from, along with coming from a very dysfunctional family that's helped me practice and understand family systems better based on getting to work some of these theories out in my own family system. So I'm by no means have, studied this and gotten an A, for those of you worried about that, but I do have a lot of experience with it. So questions, concerns? Good. Okay. All right. Well, let's go to.
Did you know this man? Did you know Mr. Powell?
I did not know Mr. Bo. Yeah. So the origins of family systems. Marie Bowen developed family systems theory and the Bowen family systems theory. He served 5 years in World War II, and then after that he became a psychiatrist at the Menninger Clinic, where he studied people with schizophrenia. And then after that, he moved to Bethesda and became the first director of the family divisions at the National Institute of Mental Health. And he began studying emotional function as a part of the natural system. So viewing the family as one structure. And so this was sort of the first time that this understanding an individual as someone who is a part of a family structure. And then in 1959, Bowen moved to the Department of Psychiatry at Georgetown. And then in 1978, he published the Family Therapy in a Clinical Practice, which has provided details of his new theory and theory techniques. There's a bunch of books. I can put all these in the chat, but one that's pretty succinct and helpful based on his theory is called The 8 Concepts of Bowen Theory, by Roberta Gilbert, and I think that's been super helpful. So that's where Bowen started. Some other people that you might hear of in family systems is a guy named Michael Kerr. He studied under Marie Bowen, and then another guy is Ed Freeman, and he was a Jewish rabbi, and he's took a lot of what he's studied came from the theory from Marie Bowen. Or Marie Bowen, yeah. So Bowen family systems theory centers around 2 counterbalancing and competing life forces. The idea of togetherness. Hello, come in. Yes, have a seat. Togetherness and individuality. Bowen theory does more than just place the individual within the family. It understands the family as the basic unit of human functioning. Now, this is different because we live in a culture and a society that says, you can, yeah, just leave on this one. We live in a culture and a society that says, you're your own individual person. When we think of other cultures around the world that function more like sort of this idea of like I don't want to use tribalism as a bad word, but just this idea that like the family unit is one is larger, and two, the family unit stays together for like, you know, you have generations living in a household. In America, that's not really how we do things. It's very much individualized. So like when I lived in a community of, you know, 6 people for 10 years, that's a very strange way to live your life in a culture that tells you that to have your own house and a white picket fence and to have your own stuff, right? So like, that's really not the way that we sort of understand our own personhood. So along with this Bowen theory, he came up with this concept that unbalanced towards individuality, meaning if someone is too much of an individual, there's this emotional cutoff from the rest of the family system. And then if there's an unbalanced or a too much of togetherness, it leads to this fusion, right? When I think of like the most famous fused family, the one that comes to mind are like the Kardashians. Oh God. You know, you're like, these people, the most unhealthy family system. Everyone works for everybody. Mom's the manager. It's like they're on their own TV show. It's crazy. That's fusion, right? Okay, making sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. Here we go. We're gonna stay right here. Don't move the slide. The theory of Bowen theory has these 8 cohesive concepts. We're gonna look at the first 3 today, but I just want to briefly mention the other 5 just so we're not totally, because some of these things you all sort of talked about. Nuclear family as an emotional system. So we're going to talk about that in depth. The differentiation of self and triangles. Cutoff, meaning what happens when, you know, this individuality is too far one way, it leads to cutoff. The family projection process. This is the idea of like what are some family mantras, you know, like my family, everyone, a lot of like my grandparents and my dad, everyone's like a business owner, right? So this idea that like we don't work for the man. Well, guess who got ordained and now works for the Lord? So it's kind of a mess. Yeah, but another one in our family was you know, don't quit what you start, finish what you start, you know. And it's like, what the heck? Like nowadays it's like, I'm not sure I want to finish that. You know. Another one, my grandmother grew up in the Great Depression. Eat everything on your plate.
Yes.
There we go. Okay. You know, my mom's mother, my grandmother, she said, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. That's bullshit. Really. Work is work. Like
they still think my 40 years of teaching was the hardest
thing
I ever did.
So you can love what you do, it's still work. I don't know. Anyways, so that's 5. Number 6, multi-generational transmission process. Again, that's just understand, like you guys are talking about that with your geneograms, you know. This is the understanding of what does it look like when your great-grandparents transfer this generational trauma to you, you know. For me, my great-grandmother, I was telling the group here, her first husband was come back from the war, and he had what we now would call PTSD and couldn't keep a job. And so she became a single mom with 2 kids in the 40s. Women didn't work in the 40s, but she did. So she put both of her kids in boarding school. So my grandmother was raised by nuns in a Catholic boarding school here in town. So then when she had my mom, and then she became a single mother, there's a pattern there. She didn't know how to be a mother because she was raised by nuns. And so she just wanted to be my mom's best friend. So then my mom had me when she was very young, at 20. I guess it's not really young then, but it is now. And she didn't know how to be a mother either. And and then she became a single mother. 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 And then she when I was 10. So that started with my great grandmother, right? That's why we do these geneograms. I heard some of you mention like, oh, well, my family, I'm the youngest of 8, everyone's dead. Well, death does not mean that we're cut off from our family system. Like their stories still have an impact on our lives today. And so my sister, she's younger than me, but she's about to get divorced and be a single mom. So what do you do? You just, okay, yeah, I can't save her from that. So it's good to be aware of these things. That's just one pattern of behavior, and all of our family systems, it's different, right? There's other patterns too that we could talk about. Bowen also talked about sibling position. What is that? Are you the oldest? Are you the youngest? Are you the middle? That plays a role into understanding the family system. And then the last thing is this emotional process in society. So for Bowen, it was, we understand our family system in a very, the better we understand our family system and our function in it, right? The roles that we play in it, the better then we can move out into the world, into society, and see these patterns play out. And all of this helps us, the goal being that we can reduce chronic anxiety, right? And allow each of us to be a non-anxious presence in the world. And so that's really the goal for Bowen. Another thing is that I just want to mention is that how do you reduce chronic anxiety? You reduce chronic anxiety by being able to sit in a place and understand that what's happening around you probably has little to do with you. And your ability to sort of change your family system is really not really going to happen, right? The only person you can change is yourself. And so this idea of like a moral code describes how people should behave, right? It's very prescriptive. So I'm going to say that again. A moral code describes how people should behave, right? Which is prescriptive. What Bowen theory does is describes how people do behave, right? Which is descriptive. So if I have a better understanding of how people do behave, then I'm less caught off guard when I encounter, rude people in the checkout line of HEB, or when, my sister calls and tells me that she's getting a divorce, or when a parishioner comes and tells me some, crazy story, or someone who in need comes and shares just this, sort of this unbelievable story, and you're just like, I'm gonna just sit here and listen, and I'm gonna be a non-anxious presence, and I'm not gonna I can't rescue this person from the situation that they're in. I can't change the situation. That I can listen, I can offer advice, I can direct them to people and resources that could help them, but at the end it's their choice whether or not they do that, right? Because this is how people do behave. Questions about that? Any of those? Yes, Anna.
You said that something prescribes how we should behave and something describes how people do behave.
Okay, yes. A moral code describes how people should behave, right? And that's prescriptive. Sorry that this is not in your notes. And the Bowen theory describes how people do behave, right? This is prescriptive. So, it's descriptive. So what we're doing is what we're going to talk about today is not necessarily how people should behave. We're talking about how people do behave. Right. That's what we're going to be talking about today.
So I have a question.
Yes.
How does codependence fit into this?
Codependence fits into this, and we're going to talk more about this when we talk about triangles. And we'll talk a little bit about it too when we talk about the differentiation of self. So actually codependence is kind of flurried throughout. So I'll try to bring that up. Is there anything else that you're wondering about like that I can mention that maybe it's not in the notes as we go along? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here we have the first one, which is the family as the emotional system. So the concept of the emotional system is one of the most important in family systems theory. This is sort of like the cornerstone of understanding family systems. And it provides the basis for establishing a behavioral, let's just stay there, behavioral link between humans and other animals. And so here we have like a hive of bees, right? And I recently saw on like Instagram the other day that someone had this like whole hive of bees living underneath their shed, and they called in a beekeeper to come get them. And they took a chunk of the beehive and put it, and they put it into, or the honeycomb, and they put it into a box, a beehive, you know. And then pretty quickly, guess what happened? All the bees just migrated themselves over there. They just did their thing. And they found the queen bee, and they got her in a little box, and they kept her safe, and they put her over there with all the other ones, and everyone just kept following. That is an emotional response, right? They want to stick together. So there's lots of animals and different breeds of creatures that function this way. Bees, ants, rats, birds, whales. I mean, you can see sort of this like herd mentality in nature sort of unfold. The emotional system includes responses that range from the most automatic, instinctual ones that contain a mix of automatic and learned elements. So, this idea of like fight or flight, but then also people will respond in a family system the way that they are trained to do that, right? The way that it's a learned behavior. I'll talk about that in a minute. I was going to use that example now, but I won't do that. Guided by an emotional system, organisms appear to respond sometimes based on self-interest or interest of the group. Meaning, when some of the bees started to migrate, right? A few of them started, and then and maybe that was like for their own sort of individual safety, but then quickly the rest of the bees come along too, right? So sometimes we function only for ourselves, but most of the time it's based on the interest of the group. So the emotional concept, or the concept of an emotional system, serves as an important purpose, right? It establishes the cornerstone of the family system theory as the assumption that the behavior of all forms of life is driven and regulated by the same fundamental life forces, right? So like, we're really no different than our sort of animal friends. And one of them, go ahead.
Driven by what kind of forces?
Life forces. One of the major revelations of the human family was that the functioning of the individual was far more regulated by relationships than previously thought. Yeah. So I'll say that again because I think it's important. One of the major revelations of the human family was that the functioning of the individual was far more regulated by relationships than previously thought. Meaning the relationships that we have within our family unit influence the way that we act and respond in the world, right? Do we agree with that? Mm-hmm. Okay, good, because it's true. All right, let's go to the next slide. So along the same lines of family emotional system, this is where we get the overfunctioner, underfunctioner behavior. Meaning, has everyone heard this before? Overfunctioner, underfunctioner? Not really?
No.
Okay. All right, you guys got to get on Instagram, man. There's some stuff on there y'all need to see. All right. Overfunctioner and underfunctioner. Let's take the workplace as an example. Okay. You're at a job and you have, let's say there's a boss and he is not doing his job very well, but this boss also has a secretary. And there's some things that are getting left undone that ought to be done. And the secretary starts to do these things to make sure that everyone else in the company knows what's happening, or everyone else in the or to cover the boss's, you know what, right? Is that a fair, is that something that makes sense to us as an understanding?
Yes.
Okay, so the boss is the under functioner, and the secretary quickly becomes the over functioner. Now, based on just an overstated gender statement here, women tend to be over functioners and men tend to be under functioners. That's not like, that's also partially just learned behavior, right? If you think about it in your household, you know, I've asked my husband 5 times to take out the trash. And I'm just going to do it for him because he still hasn't done it. That's an example of under functioning and over functioning, right? I am an over functioner. I over function for the people that I work for and with. I over function when I live in community. It's just the way that I operate, because if I see something that needs to be done, no better person to do it than I.
Control.
But the same person can be an over functioner in some contexts and an under functioner in other contexts.
Exactly. Yes. So yes. So you can be an under functioner in the workplace and an over functioner at home, or vice versa, right? You can be an over functioner at work and an under functioner at home. It's all just depends on sort of your system, right? Your family system, the organizational system. Just because you work hard does not mean that you're an over functioner. Okay, I just want to make that clear. Working hard is not equal to over functioning. Those are 2 different things. So let's look at this slide here. An over functioner knows what's best not only for themselves but for others as well, right? They move quickly into advice, rescue, and takeover when stress hits. This is like when someone gets sick, you know, and you are the one organizing the meal train, you know, or you're the one that's you know, going over to the house and cleaning, or, you know, whatever the case may be. You offer rides, you know, to the doctor, all that kind of stuff. It's not bad. It's just an over functioning position. An over functioner also has difficulty staying out and allowing others to struggle with their own problems. They avoid worrying about their own personal goals and problems by focusing on others. And they have a difficulty sharing their own vulnerable and under-functioning side, especially with those people who are viewed as having problems. So like if you're the older sibling and you're going through something, dare not tell your younger crazy sister that you got a problem. You don't do that. You also, as an overfunctioner, may be labeled as a person who's always reliable, always together, and a person we can trust, right? We want to be those things. I mean, I don't think those are bad things, but there are times when we overfunction in places that our overfunctioning may not be welcomed or helpful always. An underfunctioner tends to have several areas where they just can't get organized, you know? Be less competent under stress, thus exciting others to take over. And they tend to develop physical or emotional symptoms when stress is high in either the family or in the work situation. When I lived in community, I could literally like tell you without fail when one of the girls was going to get a migraine. And it was all stress related. It was usually around Easter and Christmas. She worked in a church. So, you know, but I mean, like we laugh, but it's true. Like, if you think about it, like, when do I, you know, if you're an underfunctioner, when does the stress hit and how does my body respond?
That's all we all think.
That's what. As an underfunctioner, you may become the focus of family gossip or worry or concern.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Uh,
So under functioners could be viewed as manipulating the constellation to bring attention to themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if you are an overfunctioner, you are the one who's going to focus on the underfunction.
Absolutely.
Because you are really stressed out about it.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take issue with the fourth bullet on the left, and you're the expert, I'm not, but it seems to me that in a Benedictine context, sometimes avoid worrying about their own personal, okay? I think in crisis situations, when there is an overwhelming need in the family,
Mm-hmm.
we over functioners may consciously set our own needs and goals aside,
Right.
recognizing that the other person's needs and goals are more important at that point in time.
Okay.
That's a conscious decision,
Yes.
not just something it's not an avoidance,
Mm-hmm.
it's a prioritization.
Right. I think
would
I
like
noticed. Go ahead.
I would like to add something to what Andy is saying. And that is, it's important, I think, not to label someone as under functioning or over functioning, because I think we all kind of fluctuate between these. And what's more important is to be aware of when you're over functioning or when you're under functioning, and try to draw it closer together so that you're in the middle and doing your doing doesn't become over functioning or under functioning. And I just see it more as very fluid concepts, that you might have tendency to be over functioning, but if you're aware of that, or tendency to be under functioning, but there's sometimes, having been teaching nursing for a long time, one of my professors one time told me that as the faculty, when a person is going to do a procedure, just put your hands in your pockets. Do not put anything over there while the person's doing the procedure, unless they're going to do some harm to the patient. They may not do it exactly right, but you don't want to stop them unless they're going to do something wrong. And so there may be sometimes when you underfunction intentionally to allow somebody to work through and go through all the steps or solve a problem all by themselves and succeed. And you may be an overfunctioner, as a general rule, but that you see the benefit of sitting back and allowing the person to succeed, so that then afterwards you can say, oh, you did everything great except for this one thing. Let me show you how to do this part a little bit more easily. So I see it much more as, rather than labeling, as being I just don't like labeling, period. So that's probably where I'm coming from, but that it's a fluid thing, that that your awareness of your own behaviors and your own emotional background will affect your behavior. And the more you can be aware of that, the better you can function. So better functioning. There ought to be a middle one called best functioning or something like that.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I think this is not to say just because I have a tendency to overfunction doesn't mean that I'm always going to overfunction, right? It means that I'm aware that that's my default, and that when things come up, right, it's not a matter of when there's a crisis, it doesn't mean that I'm just going to stand back and say, I'm not going to overfunction. No, it means I'm gonna assess the situation. I'm gonna ask the person in crisis what they need, rather than assuming I know what they need, right? Because a lot of the times, we tend to say, I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna fix this, and I know how to fix it. But the reality is, like, that's not always true, right? And it's different when, like Anne mentioned, like in a nursing situation, it's different when you're teaching someone, right? And giving them space to learn and to grow and to make mistakes. But in a family, like in a family situation, you know, the idea that you as the rescuer has to rescue, no, like that's not always helpful, right? And in fact, like it's detrimental, because what we're doing as the person who tends to underfunction, we're not helping them function in the middle, and you know, in a non-labeled functioning way, right? All we're doing is saying, like, keep acting this way and I'll fix it, right? Here's sort of a nice bow on this part, which is, it's in your notes: a family who cares for each other versus a family that is fused together and cannot function without each other. Right? So the idea that, like, yeah, this idea that, like, as a family, you can care for each other, and you for a season can put things aside and deal with the task at hand and move forward. But it doesn't mean that but then you can move on, right? It doesn't mean then that the family cannot function without each other, right?
Interdependence versus codependence.
Correct. Okay, questions about the emotional system before we move on to differentiation of self? Someone asked, someone in here asked, is there any hope? Yes, I think one of the things family systems gets labeled as like a not hopeful sort of theory, because it's very, like, kind of cut and dry. And I think the hope that's found for me in family systems, it's allowed me to function in a more healthy way within my own family system. And as a clergy person, as a person in leadership, it allows me to be a non-anxious presence. And it also helps me to watch behavior play out in a church system that is learned behavior, right? You can go to a church and you can be like, man, this place is so dysfunctional. I wonder why. Instead of, gosh, this place is so hard to work. Why are people acting like this? You know, it gives me a better place to stand and observe what's going on around me, and in a way that I don't need to change or fix it. I just need to understand it so I can work within the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's talk about differentiation of self, because this is probably the thing I've tried the hardest to do within my own family system. So can we go to the next slide, please? Is this word new to anyone? Differentiation? Has anyone heard this word before?
Yeah.
New word? No.
No.
Old word.
Oh.
Got it. New for you. Okay. The differentiation is defined as the ability to function autonomously as an individual without being emotionally dependent upon or attached to the family process. So it's regulating independence within relationships. It's balancing between complete autonomy, which is emotional cutoff, which we don't want to do, and connectedness, which is fusion, which we don't want to do that either. We want to be somewhere in the middle. And so balancing thinking and feeling, right? Understanding that there has to be this fine dance. I'll share this story. So my sister, when she last got divorced after her,
Oh, this is not
the first divorce. This is like probably 12 years ago. She moved back. She got out of the army, moved back from Germany. She had a 2-year-old in tow with her, and she moved into my dad and stepmom's back house. And my stepmom and my dad were just like wanted to help her because she had the first grandbaby, so this was a big deal. But also my stepmom was like not having my sister's newfound singleness freedom, that, and so my stepmom would just call me all the time and like try to suck me into this emotional situation. And she would suck me in. And I just took it. Like I became the anxiety sink. I became the emotional, just dumping ground for my dad and my stepmom and their frustration with my sister. And I was taking family systems at the time, and that's when I first started taking this course. And so I was like, I keep getting sucked in. And so finally, one time my stepmom called and she said, "You would not believe what your sister did." And I was like, "Oh yeah, she always does that. That's just who she is. She just always does that." And I just kind of like didn't pick up the anxiety. I didn't take it. I just left it there. And I kept doing that and I kept doing that. And sure enough, the phone calls became shorter in conversation and they became less frequent.
Wow.
And at one point, they were so mad because she was going on dates with some, she was dating. And I said, "Well, who's watching the kid when she's going on all these dates?" And they were like, "We are." And I said, "Oh, well, do you think you might be enabling this behavior that you're not happy with?" And they were like,
That made him mad.
"No, we're not." And I was like, they're like, "Well, who else is going to watch the kid?" I go, "I don't know, a babysitter?" I don't know. Anyone can watch the kid. Right. So so for me, it was like, how can I function autonomously as an individual without being emotionally dependent or attached to this thing that was happening in my family system. It didn't mean that I didn't care. It didn't mean that, it was just accepting my sister for who she was and deciding that these were not boundaries that were mine to put in place. They were my parents' boundaries to figure out how they were going to have a conversation with her about the behavior that they were unhappy with, right? Has nothing to do with me. But I would get sucked in all the time. So it's this idea of balancing intimacy with individuality. So differentiation of self is demonstrated by the degree to which a person can think, plan, and follow his or her own values and convictions, particularly around anxiety-provoking issues, without having his or her behavior automatically driven by the emotional and intellectual functioning and intimacy. So it's how do I, in this photo, in this image here of this woman with the pencil drawing a circle around herself, how does she stay connected to the people on the outside of the circle, stay connected to them, but also have boundaries, right? So it's the ability to think and reflect and not respond automatically to emotional pressures. So a more highly differentiated individual can experience a strong emotion and shift to logical reasoning and decision-making and problem solving. So the more differentiated you are, the better you're able to think and make decisions, because you're not emotionally being sucked into a situation, right? It took me a while, but I could finally look at the situation with my sister and my parents and say, maybe you guys are enabling this behavior. That wasn't my first response. It was once I was able to get some emotional distance from the situation, then I was able to offer that feedback, which was not wanted, but
Often it's not.
yeah, it's not wanted.
When you make that stand,
Yeah,
you're often
yeah.
the bad guy.
Usually
Yeah, they accuse you of betraying them.
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
It's a lot of this is about manipulation.
yes. If you are a differentiated person, a well-differentiated person, a more differentiated person, you will get resistance from the system, right? The system operates in a certain way, and we all play a certain role in our family system, right? Mine was the anxiety sink, the rescuer, the fixer, the problem solver, right? And the minute I decided, I don't think I want to do that anymore, it was like, I would keep getting sucked back in. They would, at any turn, I would get sucked back in to try to, for the system, the system functioned the way it was supposed to when I was functioning, in an undifferentiated way.
When you were doing your part.
When I was doing my
Yes,
part,
I mean,
yes.
that's good.
Stop doing your part and you will be told. Yeah.
For sure.
So an undifferentiated individual tends to act based on emotions and find it difficult to maintain their own autonomy, right? Thoughts, questions? Anyone on the Zooms?
Can I share a little story?
Sure.
Since we're all being vulnerable and telling stories. When my mother decided to divorce my father when I was 28, she started to tell me everything she didn't like about my father. And she would call me and say, well, this is what your father did. This is what your father did. To the point where I was physically ill. I was so sick. I won't describe those symptoms, but it was not pretty. I was so sick that my husband said, we have to get out of town. And we left for Thanksgiving to just give me some space. And I said some very ugly things to my mother. You know, I said, get this the blank over with and leave me out of it, because it had pushed me to a point of no return. I had to consider my own survival. And boy, was she mad. She was mad because I was her dumpy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You don't dump on somebody about your father.
Well, people do it all the time.
Of course they do. Of course they do. But yeah, it's very painful.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide and then we'll talk a little bit about this. Differentiation of self is roughly equivalent to emotional maturity, right? So this idea of emotional maturity is the ability to take control of your emotions and take full responsibility for your life. A large part of being emotionally mature is having the ability to handle a myriad of feelings appropriately. So if you look on this wheel of emotions that I've just thrown up here, you know, how can you handle anger, disappointment, guilt, resentment, fear, jealousy, grief, insecurity, and feel those emotions appropriately, right? Emotional maturity is defined when you have the ability to experience these emotions and then quickly let them go, right? Like we hold on to things, right? I mean, like, I grew up in a Mexican family. I know I don't look it, but I grew up in a Mexican household and family, and man, we can hold a grudge. Like if they were giving out awards, like we would get it. Like we will take it to the grave, you know. Grudges are like our number one thing. So but that's not like, but all of that is like holding anger and jealousy and fear and insecurity, right? It's all of that, holding that on for too long. People who are immature seem to remain stuck in these negative emotions and unable to get past them. You know, there's a lot of emotionally immature people walking around out in the world. And
Today, oh yeah.
and you know,
It isn't so.
and you know when you rub up against them, because it's clear, right? That when you encounter someone and they just, you know, go off on you, you know, in an instance that has nothing to do with you, right? Like we are socially and emotionally aware enough to know that, like, we, you know, did not cut them off in line in the checkout line of HEB. They're just losing their brains, you know, like it's like, okay, I'm just going to take 3 steps back and let them sort this out, or not, but I don't need to insert myself in this situation. So you know, differentiation is in a large sense also emotional maturity. How do you have an encounter with your family in crises, and, you know, not get sucked into a place where this isn't good, you know? Yeah, it's,
How do you manage your own emotions in order to keep yourself from being manipulated?
yeah, for sure. I'll share this. My grandmother just died a year ago, and I was her caretaker for 5 years, the last 5 years of her life. And her and my mother, her only daughter, had a falling out probably 15 years ago. And so I was in charge of all the things. I was the I overfunctioned. I was the medical power of attorney. I was the power of attorney. I had all the things, all the responsibilities legally and whatnot. My mom's a nurse. My grandmother had a stroke and she was paralyzed. And my grandmother and I, in those 5 years, had some really honest conversations about how she wanted to live and, you know, and how she didn't want to live. And so when the time came, after we realized that this was a debilitating stroke, that she wasn't ever going to walk again, she might not ever talk again, and she couldn't obviously go back home and live independently. Her and I had some really hard conversations in the hospital. And, you know, my mom quickly was like, I'll take her and she can live with me. And I was like, hell to the no, that's not going to happen. But what ended up becoming the hardest thing to navigate in all of that for me, like in my mind, I was like, when Granny gets to a place where she's going to die or whatever, all these other things are going to be really hard. Like I had prepared myself for the task at hand of dealing with her estate. What I hadn't prepared myself for was navigating the emotional roller coaster of letting my mom be the daughter of my grandmother and having some sense of autonomy and responsibility and care for her, while also knowing that it was on me to do that, right? That it was still my legal responsibility. It was still the responsibility that my grandmother wanted me to have. And what she wanted most in life was to have a relationship with her daughter. So navigating those emotions and not getting sucked in, you know? So having to tell my mom, no, that's not gonna happen. And having to put my grandmother on hospice, which is what she wanted. And then having to tell my mom that I did that, you know? Those are like big girl.
You didn't have anything written out.
Oh, it was all written out.
Your grandmother?
We had it all. I had it all.
Didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
It sounds like your mother was trying to keep herself from feeling like she was shirking her responsibility, but getting you to do the work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think so sometimes, you know, but you have to be aware of what's going on. You have to be differentiated enough to be able to stand in a place and make those decisions that you have to make by not getting sucked in emotionally by the force field of everyone else around you, you know, of like everyone needing to weigh in on what you should do or not do, or what your grandmother would have wanted or not wanted, you know? So differentiation is important for a whole host of reasons, but it really is helpful when you can stand in a place and make those decisions because and not get sucked in.
Did your mother ever
Back off.
Oh yeah, no, she knew. I mean, I think for her it was like, you know, an emotional place for my mother, it was like a 45-minute conversation of like, this is what Granny wanted. And when my mom could come to a place of like, you're right, this is about what she wants. And I was like, okay, you know, and it was also like, Mom, you can't take care of her. This is beyond our scope and sequence, you know? She needs to go to like a care home and like sort it out. So anyways, those things. She was 86. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next slide. And we're going to talk about Friedman, who I mentioned. He wrote a bunch of books, but two good ones here are The Failure of Nerve and Generation to Generation. I think one of those or both of those are on your notes in your book.
Yeah.
Friedman's description of differentiation is this, which I think is really helpful. It's the capacity to take a stand in an intense emotional system, what I was just talking about, saying I when others are demanding we, and containing one's reactivity to the reaction of others, which includes the ability of avoiding being polarized, meaning I'm not gonna get pulled one way or the other, right? I'm gonna try to stay in my middle place in the midst of this emotional system. Maintaining a non-anxious presence in the face of anxious others. Knowing where one ends and another begins. And being able to cease automatically being one of the system's emotional dominoes. Now, that means like, you know, when my mother tells me I want to take your grandmother home and take care of her at my house, it doesn't mean I'm gonna then take that on and be like, oh my gosh, you could actually do that. And then pick up the phone and call my sister and say, can you believe what mother said? No, and the buck stops here, right? I'm not gonna like domino this thing into and propel it forward. I think that we tend to do that a lot, where it's the, oh my God, did you hear?
Yes, oh, yes.
My sister is notorious for getting hurt. Like she's just like a wild child. She rides horses, she has horses, and like she literally goes to the hospital at the most inconvenient time. And it like my family will like call me and it'll be like, have you heard what happened to your sister? And I'm like, there's no telling what's happened. And then before I would be like, oh my God, what happened? And now I'm just like, what, where are we? Is she going to the hospital? Like, what did she do? Oh, she broke her leg. Okay, well, call me when we know more, you know?
Keep me posted.
Keep me posted. So the last one here is taking maximum responsibility for one's own emotional being and destiny, rather than blaming others or the context, right? So the idea is a more differentiated person can participate freely in the emotional sphere without fear of becoming too fused with others. So differentiation is capable of a genuine concern for others without expecting something in return.
Say that again.
Differentiation is capable of a genuine concern for others without expecting something in return, right? So it's like, I can care for you, but I'm not doing it because in 6 months, I'm going to need something and expect you to be there. Sometimes we do that.
We do that.
Just sometimes. Just sometimes.
I mean, some people.
Yeah. Okay, questions about differentiation? I'm gonna move to the thingy-mabob.
Okay.
I'm gonna move over here to this board we have set up so we can talk about triangles. Because there's only so many triangles you can draw on the screen.
It's gonna find your gene.
You gonna solve all our problems?
I don't think so. Okay, can you guys see me, hear me? Great. So we did it.
Well done.
Oh, he's becoming a pro.
He's almost. Yeah.
So according to Bowen, triangles are the smallest stable emotional system, right? So we think about, you know, I don't know, can you guys see that? Oh, you have a mom and a dad.
We turn the light front ones.
We're gonna turn off some lights in here.
Oh, that's okay. I had some extra ones here.
How's that?
Perfect. Can you guys see
That's
now?
better.
That was a lot. better.
Turn both of them off.
Yeah, because there's light and light.
That's much better.
Okay. So we have a mom and a dad. And how many of have heard of a situation where there's a couple that I don't know if that necessarily will.
Yeah, it helped.
Yeah.
There we go.
All right, can you all see us?
No, that's pretty
Just
dark.
watch for chords.
Okay, so we have a mom and a dad, and then maybe, or we have two parents or whatever, and their marriage is on the rocks, right? They're having some marital discourse. Their things are not maybe as good as they thought they would be after they got married. And then what ends up happening? What do they decide to do?
Divorce.
Nope,
Separate.
nope.
Save
Work on it, stay for the kids.
Well, there's no kids right now. They're just married and they're having troubles.
Why?
What do they decide to do?
Go for counseling.
Nope. They decide to have a kid.
Yes, that'll fix everything.
Oh, boy.
Oh, no.
They decide to have a child so that it can stabilize their marriage and their relationship. Have we all heard this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is not a foreign concept. This is real. This is real life. So the idea of a triangle is the most smallest stable emotional system, right? So now, instead of this couple dealing with their anxiety that they have with themselves, they can focus on the child. And now the child becomes the anxiety sink of this dyad, right? Of this couple. And so we see this unfold a lot in family systems. And as you look at your Enneagram, and as you if you study other things in family systems, you will see a myriad of ways in which this gets played out. Sometimes you'll have a couple who loses a child, and then they have another one, right? And then that child gets all the anxiety and focus. So anxiety is the driving force behind emotional triangles, right? Triangles are formed when anxiety becomes when the anxiety between the dyad becomes overwhelming, and a third actor is unconsciously enlisted to reduce the anxiety. Right? So triangles are adaptive, and many reduce the anxiety within the original dyad, right? But often creates new anxiety between the triangulated individual and members of the original dyad. So, this is like classic triangling 101. The minute we can understand this in our own family system and recognize this in our own family little unit, the better we can see it play out in the world. You would not believe, I work with Mike Mickey, you would not believe how many people unintentionally, intentionally, other staff people try to triangulate Mike and I against each other.
Now, who's my?
No kidding.
Sorry, Mike Mickey is the rector at St. Thomas. So he and I work together, and it's like he's dad and I'm mom, and people try to like play us off of each other. Like,
Really?
yes. But it's learned behavior, right, from this, right? If you look in your notes, I think I put it on the slideshow. We have the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. That's another way to understand triangles, but for the purpose of family systems, we'll just stick with this sort of unit. Let me think here.
Well, did they do the same before you came? Did they do it to Mike, Father Mike? And
Well, there wasn't an associate with him before me, so. Okay, we're a little bit over time, so let me, is there any questions about triangles? Does this make sense? The anxiety is here, it has to go somewhere. Sometimes in these situations, the mother or one of the parents will focus all their energy on the child, and then they become fused, and the other parent is sort of on the out, right? So then you create a dyad here, and then they sort of have this person on the outside. The idea though is all relationships, we're all a part of a triangle, right? Like we're all part of some sort of an anxiety, stability, triangle. So like, you know, my sister and I, we are a dyad, and we are a part of so many triangles with our parents and with our step parents, with her, you know, kids. And so sometimes when her and I are talking and she is stressed about something or has a problem, I will just quickly ask her how our parents are, because I want to know if one, has she talked to them about this, and two, what are they thinking? Because and it also lets me know, like, who else has she talked to about this? Has she talked to, you know, have you talked to mom about that? Have you talked to dad about that? Well, what did they say?
So
What
is
did they
she
think?
looking for somebody to be on her side? Is she
Sometimes.
looking for that person who will say, yes, you're right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we always want someone to agree with us and let us think that the decisions we're making are good,
Yeah.
you know, and right.
As a teacher, I taught elementary school for the most of my career, and what I would see is there's a mom and a dad, and say a fifth grader who is very disruptive and very antisocial. And the mama is going to encircle that kid and enable everything he does. And the dad wants to set some parameters for his behavior. And you have a totally unworkable situation, because that child is just going to feed off that mom.
You just described my first marriage.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Wow.
I think the other thing that's important to remember about triangles is that they're everywhere, and it's good to recognize when you're in one. Sometimes we don't think we're in one. Sometimes we think, you know, that it's just, you know, let's see, what's the way to say? Okay, no, that's too much. Let's see. It's a good triangle. It's a good triangle.
About with a friend.
With a friend. So this is good. I live in the back house of my best friend's mother. So
Right now?
yeah, right now. So you have Allie here, that's me. You have my best friend Tina, right? We've been best friends for over a decade. We have a good, healthy relationship. She has 2 kids, they're both my godchildren. And I live in her mother, Jackie's back house. So my best friend and I are in a triangle all the time with her mother, right? Because her mother and I live in the same property. I live in her back house. We walk every morning for an hour, and we talk. And so I know what she thinks about Tina, her daughter. I know what she thinks about Tina's husband, Matt.
Oh, this is awful.
Right. No, but it sounds awful, but I know that I'm in it, right?
Yeah.
I'm very aware of the triangle that I'm in.
That doesn't presuppose that any of the relationships are unhealthy.
No, it doesn't. No, it's not saying that this is very stable. This is a very stable triad,
Yeah.
or a triad, because I have boundaries with Jackie, right? There's things I don't tell Jackie about Tina and her marriage with Matt. Right? There's things that Jackie can tell me about Tina that she can't say to her, right? Because she's her mother. But I know them. And it doesn't mean that I'm gonna tell Tina, right? So there's very clear boundaries. There's very clear boundaries.
For healthy reasons.
For healthy reasons. And sometimes I'll tell Jackie, that sounds like a triangle to me. And she goes, you're right. And sometimes I have to tell Jackie, you need to let them work this out. You cannot rescue Tina and her husband and their marriage right now. You have to they will figure it out. She goes, well, you know, I like to rescue. I said, I do. And I'm telling you not to.
It's what moms do.
It's what moms do, right? And she goes, I'm the mother. And I said, I know you're the mother. And right now I'm asking you, just stay out of it.
But
Right.
if Tina's an adult,
Yes.
mothering is no longer mothering, it's now coaching and encouragement and support. It's not
It's also interference.
Yeah.
if it's unhealthy.
Okay, so here's a good example. Matt and Tina have 2 kids, and I knew Tina told me, like, I'm really behind in work right now. Like I'm drowning in work right now. And sometimes Tina would call last minute Jackie and say, I need you to watch the kids. And Jackie would be like, I have plans, I have stuff to do, or didn't like the last minute nature of it. And without telling Jackie what was going on, I went to Jackie and I said, Tina really needs our help right now. So when she calls and asks you to watch the kids, you say yes. And then you call me, and if I can come home from work early, I will, and I'll help you watch the kids. And she was like, oh, this is serious. I said, yeah, it's a little serious.
Wow.
And she's like, okay. And I was like, don't back talk. Don't just say yes. She just needs a yes right now. And so that's been super helpful for Jackie, because it's not that I'm like, I'm not telling her what's going on. I'm just like, she really needs our help. She's asking for help, and typically she doesn't ask for help. So let's try to help her, and I'm gonna help you help her. And so then Tina has a twin brother, Ryan, right? And Ryan sometimes is a jerk to Tina. So Jackie, what does Jackie do? She calls Ryan. She calls Ryan and she says, listen, don't be a jerk to your sister right now. She's really deep in it. And Ryan's like, all right, sounds good. And he wasn't. So, we're all in triangles, right? I mean, this is, a very sort of, I wouldn't say a fused family, but a very enmeshed family. Like we all live in San Antonio, right?
A mess.
A mess. But
No, I'm just kidding.
but this is how families work, right?
Yeah.
This is
Absolutely.
very normal. This is not like an abnormal situation at all. And so and I'm just one, character in this family system. And so it's been helpful for me to be able to recognize, like, this is the triangles we're in, this is where we're at. And
I'm teaching a course on this, Jack. And
although she hears it from, I tell her this stuff all the time.
right,
And and for Jackie,
it helps.
it helps. And for Jackie, she gets mad because sometimes I'll tell her how I function in my own family system, and she's like, I just don't think that's right. And I'm like, why?
Oh,
And so I even have pressure from Jackie sometimes, wanting me to be more fused with my family,
Yeah.
to be more undifferentiated, to take on some of the anxiety, right? Because she's 72. She's 72. She's a mother. I'm the same age as her kids. So she's thinking, what would I want my child to do in this situation? And so she tells me that, and sometimes I tell her, I'm like, I know you're not happy with the decisions that I'm making, but this is what's best for me. So I think it's important, to, once we can become differentiated and have those conversations with other people and be enmeshed in other family systems like this, maybe not this enmeshed, but to be, we can be helpful to others in these situations.
just that awareness.
Just the awareness.
Yeah, it's huge.
Okay, can I
take some questions?
Yeah, let's take some questions. I'm gonna go back to my other seat over here.
Do you want to go back to the charts, or are we done with them?
We're done.
We're done.
Okay.
Just her face will be.
I was gonna say good, huh? Oh, my God.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So does anybody have a question or comment about that? Allie's talk?
If you want to talk, you're gonna have to unmute yourselves.
Allie, I really appreciate the demonstration of the triangles, because when we talk about that or read about that, it gets kind of messy in my head really fast, and it gets messy on the whiteboard, but that was very clear. So thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
So is everyone imagining your triangles now?
Mhm.
I'm finding myself thinking.
Are you gonna cover this last piece about family reaction to death?
I can, yeah. Do we want to do that? Do we have time for that? I don't know what the time is.
How fast can you do it?
Quickly,
Yeah, we'll just do it. We'll go through it quickly.
can I borrow your, they're not in my notes.
You need charts?
No, you're fine, just leave it like that. The last little bit in your notes, is a, family's reaction to death. I heard some people mentioning, at the beginning of our time this morning, of y'all's time this morning about, doing your genealogram and like people being dead and,
Nothing
just
important.
because people are dead does not mean we're not in a relationship with them. So let that sink in for a second. So when we talk about differentiation in the context of death, this is sort of how this works and unfolds. Remember, this is not a prescriptive, this is descriptive. This is what families do when these things happen. So if you look on the left side of your notes, it says low differentiation. This is when a family is not differentiated. When death happens, close communication in the family, right? So there's not a lot of communicating. There's a lot of like kind of secrets, maybe even around the death or when they're dying or, you know, whatever. Triangles. The triangles increase with chronic illness and death in the family, right? There's more blaming. You should have done this. You should have been there. Where were you? We needed help. Within the nuclear family, it becomes less stable. There's more emotional fusion. There's more unresolved attachment, and typically there's more grieving. When it comes to the family projection process, there's more blame and scapegoating. And then emotional cutoff, there's more distancing and tearing away. One of the things to be mindful when thinking about death and family systems, typically when someone dies, it's the time in a family system where either one or two things is going to happen. The first being, this will be the time when if people have been cut off from the family will come back together and there will be some reconciliation. Or this will be the time when people cut off and say, okay, I can finally part ways with these people because so-and-so is dead, right? This is when this happens. When there's a high differentiation in a family system, meaning this is a good thing, right? There's open communication with the family, right? There's less triangulating, dealing one-to-one with members in the family. So it's like, I'm going to have a direct conversation. So when my grandmother was dying, I had direct conversations with my mom, with my sister, right? With my dad, with other important family members and friends of my grandmother's, making sure that I was the one communicating with them, right? That they got the information from me, that I didn't leave it up to my mom or my sister to sort of share that, because I wasn't sure what they were hearing. Within the nuclear family, it's more stable. There's less emotional fusion, less unresolved attachment, less grieving, and more resilience. Now, grief is not a bad thing. It's not something that we should avoid. It just means that sometimes in a family system that has a high differentiation, it will appear that there's less grief, right? Because there's healthier relationships there. And then within the family projection process, there's more responsibility for self, right? And then there's autonomous connection. So this is an important, for me, this is I wanted to throw this in there because I know that some of what you guys are dealing with is death. Another thing is in Generation to Generation, if you read this book, chapter 10 in Friedman's book, it talks specifically about how when death ends a life, it doesn't end a relationship. And so chapter 10 of Generation to Generation, well, not necessarily that you can talk to the dead, just that the people who die still influence you, right? They're still a part of like your family system, even if they're no longer here with us. Yeah. Any questions about the family reaction to death?
Is anything in the chat?
What is the book called? I'll just.
So I had one question. When you're dealing with someone who's emotionally immature, how do we help them become mature?
Take care of yourself.
Out of scope.
Yeah, I think, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's probably something that we all deal with when we think about our family systems and our siblings or our parents or whatever. And it's like, how do we help them become a better version of themselves, right? Like that's a kind of a driving force behind maybe why you guys are even here. I don't know, agrees to be a part of this group. I think what's, for me, what's been helpful in that is how can I model for my own family what healthy boundaries look like, what differentiation looks like, what it looks like to not triangulate a situation. Like if my sister calls and says, have you talked to dad? No, I have not. Usually I haven't. I'm like, what's going on? And she'll tell me. And then another way that I early on when I started doing this systems work, a question that I would ask my family often when they would call me to try to suck me back in, I would say, oh my gosh, I'm really sorry to hear that. How can I help you? And typically they just wanted me to like jump back in and say, I'm going to save this situation. Like, let me tell you what you need. And when I responded that way, most of the time their response was, well, I don't know. I just wanted you to know. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. It's not that, and some of you might be hearing me talk and think, wow, this woman does not care at all about her family. This woman, she's a priest and she like, what the heck? But I think, yes, that might be, yes, maybe those comments sound harsh. But what I have found is that today, I have a better relationship with my sister than I did a decade ago. She will call me, and sometimes what she needs is someone to listen. And what I have realized is I am the only person in my family system, in our nuclear family system, that is emotionally mature enough to listen to her and to give her the feedback that she needs, or to ask the hard questions like, well, what did the counselor say? Well, how are you feeling about that? What are you most afraid of? What are you most fearful of? What's your next step? How can I support you? And those types of questions are the questions that our parents don't know how to ask, or even have the emotional maturity to even engage in. My parents will just say things like, well, we support you. Whatever you decide to do, we support you. And sometimes that's not really support. Sometimes someone needs to actually be heard, right? You need to listen. You need to take in what they're saying and put yourself in that situation and I wonder how I would be feeling if I were in her shoes right now. I wonder what I would be most scared of. I wonder what I would want to hear if I were in her shoes right now.
Right.
And maybe I would want to hear, you're doing a really good job navigating all of this. I'm sure this has been really hard and this is not really how you imagined your life being, like where you imagine your life being right now. You know, instead of, you're right, your husband is an asshole and you should leave him. Not helpful, right? You're right. I can't believe he hasn't done all of those things for you. Like, what a jerk, you know? Not helpful. Does that make sense? Does that answer?
Thank you.
your question?
Modeling often is the answer.
Yeah, modeling often.
Very often, modeling is the answer.
I think, you know, Benedict would agree with that.
He talks about modeling.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Reverend Ally.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Tricia,
Yes.
what's next? Breakout and talk
Yeah,
about
next is breakout, and you guys can talk about any questions that, anything else you want to talk about from Reverend Allie's presentation. But also there are questions in the notebook on page 11 that have to do with your genogram that talk about what are some of the unspoken rules of your family, and what are some of the strengths and blessings of your family, and what are some of the silent weaknesses or curses that you want to heal or change. So now's our time to share about that part of the homework. And if there's some other pieces about the homework, if y'all want to bring that up and talk about it, feel free. We've got 20 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Ally.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
You're so welcome. Oh, feel bad for what?
We'll be
Don't
calling
think that
you.
you've loaded us up
Can I
with
move
so
this?
much.
I want to sit here.
I mean, how long
Yeah,
it
we're done
takes,
with that.
look how many years you studied all this.
Oh, yeah,
Okay,
it's been a
where
long
you
time.
are.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
It helps if you start with a dysfunctional family, though.
No, I wouldn't trade my family for your family for that. No.
Well, I have her.
Kept looking, where are the handouts? Well, I can print it later. Where did you? At the end of Andy's email, there's an attachment that is the handout.
Does anybody want to take a break first?
I have to run to the rent.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Then we'll talk
I
about.
spilled
secret.
peanut butter on my pants. I had the wash thing and everything. Nothing brings it out, so I don't know. It's
Yeah.
either syrup or vinegar. And I could not, I did not want to walk in here and look at me and do that. Okay, and anyway, he's.
Oh.
I really want him.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. No, I think it was very informative.
Okay. Yeah, I'm also, you can let them know, like, if anyone wants to, or and obviously you guys too, but on the Zoom, like, if anyone wants to have a conversation about family systems or yeah, want other resources, I'm happy to.
Okay.
I love talking about